The first light of dawn barely brushed the horizon, casting a pale glow over Dulles International Airport. Flight 482, a massive Boeing 777 bound for Los Angeles, stood at the end of the runway, engines humming with restrained power. Inside the cabin, passengers shuffled, carrying coffee cups, newspapers, and the weight of early morning fatigue. Among them, Captain Olivia Hayes moved like a silent conductor of calm chaos. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, eyes sharp, scanning every seat, every smile, every fidgeting hand. At 35, Olivia had mastered the art of anticipation, reading nervous passengers like an open book, sensing tension before it became panic. She paused near 8A, a window seat occupied by a sleeping little girl clutching a plush bear. Olivia smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from the child's forehead. She whispered a promise she didn't yet understand herself. "We'll be safe." In the galley, flight attendants double-checked the overhead bins, confirming each latch and strap. Luggage shifted. A soft clang resonated in the confined space. The cabin smelled of fresh coffee, jet fuel, and the faint antiseptic tang that always lingered after a long cleaning crew. Outside, the control tower's signal lights blinked like watchful eyes. The pilots in the cockpit ran their pre-flight checks with meticulous precision. Olivia had flown thousands of flights, but that morning something felt off. A subtle tension in the air, an undercurrent that made her stomach knot. She shook it off, attributing it to the usual pre-flight jitters. But when she returned to her seat to greet the passengers, she caught a glimpse of a mechanic rushing across the tarmac toward the plane, waving frantically. The engines roared to life, and Flight 482 began its taxi. The runway stretched like a ribbon toward the horizon, glimmering faintly under the rising sun. Olivia took a deep breath, her hands lightly touching the straps of the emergency kit at her side. She moved down the aisle, offering warm smiles and calm words, but her mind never left the cockpit. Something about the morning felt electric, charged, like the air before a summer storm. In its after-takeoff, Flight 482 had reached 30,000 feet, gliding above the patchwork of mountains and rivers below. Passengers relaxed into their seats, some nodding off, others scrolling through their phones, oblivious to the forces that now surrounded them. Olivia walked the aisles, offering blankets and water, her eyes scanning constantly for signs of discomfort or anxiety. The little girl in 8A shifted in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible, and Olivia's instincts flared. She knelt briefly, placing a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. Then it began, a subtle vibration that rippled through the cabin, almost imperceptible at first. A faint shudder ran along the fuselage, making coffee cups rock slightly. Passengers looked around, confusion replacing comfort. Olivia's hand tightened on the seat back in front of her. She moved toward the cockpit intercom, trying to reach the pilots, but there was only static. Her heart skipped a beat. A deep, low hum reverberated beneath her feet, and the plane tilted ever so slightly to the left. The turbulence intensified. Drinks spilled, tray tables rattled, and a collective gasp arose from the cabin. Olivia's voice, calm but firm, carried over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Everything is under control." She forced a reassuring smile at the passengers, but inside, adrenaline surged like wildfire. She had trained for emergencies, but the calm she projected now was a fragile veneer over a storm of concern. A sudden, jarring thump shook the plane, sending a stack of magazines sliding across the aisle. Olivia instinctively braced herself against the galley wall, heart racing. The flight attendants froze mid-step, fear flickering across their faces. Outside, clouds churned like dark ocean waves, and a faint flicker of lightning illuminated the cockpit windows. Olivia's mind raced through every emergency scenario she had drilled over the years, from engine failure to cabin depressurization. But none of those protocols accounted for the strange silence now emanating from the cockpit. She pressed the intercom button again. "Cabin crew to cockpit. Do you copy?" Silence. Not a single word. Olivia's stomach sank. Something was terribly wrong. She moved closer to the cockpit door, a place that had always symbolized authority and safety, and found it locked. Her pulse accelerated. The metallic groan of the fuselage hinted at mechanical strain, an ominous whisper of danger. In the cabin, murmurs began to spread, passengers noticing the subtle shifts, the way the plane seemed to tilt with increasing unpredictability. Mothers clutched children, men tightened grips on armrests, and the air felt thick with anxiety. Olivia knelt briefly near the sleeping girl in 8A, brushing hair from her face, whispering soothing words she hoped were true. "It's okay. I'm right here. We'll be fine." Olivia's eyes scanned the cabin again, noting every sign of fear. Flight attendants, trained and professional, looked to her for guidance. She gave them nods of reassurance, steadying hands over trembling shoulders. Yet her own mind wrestled with the unthinkable possibility. The pilots were incapacitated, and at 30,000 feet there was no room for error. She felt the weight of every single life aboard pressing down on her, a gravity far more powerful than anything outside the plane. Then came the announcement over the intercom, a voice, barely audible, crackling with static. "Mayday, Mayday, Flight 482, we've lost all communication with ATC." Olivia's blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed. She gripped the seat in front of her, knuckles white. Around her, passengers stiffened, unaware of the exact nature of the crisis but sensing the shift from routine to emergency. Flight attendants exchanged glances, fear mirrored in their eyes. Olivia swallowed hard, taking a deep breath, and stepped toward the cockpit, each stride measured, purposeful. She reached the door and pressed her hand against the cool metal. Her mind flashed to her military flight training, the years she had spent mastering impossible maneuvers in simulators, the secret missions she had sworn never to speak of. Those skills, buried beneath a civilian life of ordinary flights, were now the only thing standing between 174 souls and catastrophe. The plane trembled again, harder this time, as though sensing her hesitation. Olivia's heart pounded in time with the engines, a rhythm of life and death. She steadied herself, knelt briefly near the girl in 8A, whispered once more, "Stay with me. I won't let anything happen to you," and then braced herself to open the cockpit door, knowing that what lay beyond could either be the end of everything or the start of a story no one would ever forget. As her fingers touched the cockpit handle, the plane shuddered violently, and a flash of lightning illuminated the instruments inside. The unknown loomed, and Olivia's instincts told her that the calm before the storm had ended. Something extraordinary and terrifying was about to happen. The cockpit door remained firmly locked, unyielding to Olivia's shaking hands. Every second stretched into an eternity, and the low hum of Flight 482's engines felt ominous, like the heartbeat of a living creature aware of its own vulnerability. Passengers shifted nervously, some whispering reassurances to their neighbors, others silently praying. Olivia's gaze flicked over the cabin, faces pale, wide-eyed, mouths moving soundlessly. She felt a pang of responsibility heavier than she had ever known. Every life aboard, 174 souls, was tethered to her next move. She turned back to the galley and called out, her voice steady but urgent. "Crew, we need to prepare for a possible emergency landing. Check your stations, secure all passengers, and stay calm." The flight attendants nodded, moving swiftly, their practiced movements undercut by the fear that gripped the cabin. Bags rattled, overhead bins clicked shut, and the scent of spilled coffee mixed with recycled air, sharp and tense. Olivia's fingers drummed on the cockpit door. The lock wouldn't budge. Panic threatened to rise, but she shoved it aside. Years of military and civilian training collided in her mind. She remembered the emergency override procedure, rarely used and considered last resort. Taking a deep breath, she retrieved the manual from under the co-pilot seat. Her hands shook, but her eyes burned with focus as she memorized the sequence of steps. This wasn't a simulation. This was real. Every flick, switch, and lever could mean life or death. The passengers didn't know the full extent of the crisis. A mother in 17C clutched her toddler, whispering, "It's okay, baby, mommy's here." An elderly man clutched his hat, muttering under his breath. Olivia moved swiftly, offering words of comfort as she checked restraints and calm points. She crouched next to a teenage boy gripping his headphones, eyes wide. "We'll get through this," she said. "Just follow my instructions. You're safe." The boy nodded, swallowing hard, clinging to her calm like a lifeline. Suddenly the plane shuddered violently. The cabin lights flickered, throwing shadows across anxious faces. Tray tables rattled and a scream pierced the hum of engines. A woman had been thrown from her seat as the aircraft lurched. Olivia reacted instantly, diving to stabilize the woman, wrapping an arm around her as the plane righted itself. Other passengers gasped, fear tightening their throats. Olivia's voice, clear and commanding, cut through the chaos. "Everyone remain seated. Stay strapped in. We're handling this." Her words were the only tether to sanity amid the rising storm of panic. She returned to the cockpit door. The metallic groan of the fuselage echoed with every tremor, reminding her that the plane was a fragile cage suspended above thousands of feet of jagged terrain. Then she noticed the first signs of a troubling pattern. The altimeter fluctuated, the plane dipping and rising unpredictably. A sudden jolt threw her against the wall. "No, no, no," she muttered, teeth clenched. The calm precision she projected to passengers belied the adrenaline flooding her veins. Every instinct screamed at her. The pilots were incapacitated, and she was the only adult capable of acting. Olivia pressed the intercom again. "Cabin crew to cockpit, respond if you can hear me." Only static answered. The radio crackled, a harsh mechanical voice repeating unintelligible fragments. Her chest tightened. She recalled her military days, the missions she had never spoken of, the flights that tested the limits of human courage. Those experiences had taught her one thing: preparation wasn't enough. She needed intuition. And in that instant she understood. The plane's fate rested in hands trained in secrecy, calm, and precision. Turbulence intensified. Outside the windows, the Appalachian peaks rose like jagged teeth, their tops obscured by churning clouds. Lightning arced across the sky, illuminating the engines, wings, and terrified faces of passengers. Olivia knelt again near 8A, brushing hair from the sleeping child's forehead. "Stay with me," she whispered, more to herself than the girl. "We're going to be okay." Her mind ran through possible maneuvers: emergency descent, controlled tilt, stabilizing the aircraft manually. She'd never performed these moves in a real, full-size jet. Her fingers itched to touch the yoke, to take control, but the cockpit door blocked her path. A sudden alarm blared, a warning light blinking red near the door. The oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling in unison, startling the passengers. Olivia moved quickly, helping them into position, guiding the elderly and terrified, checking each face. Fear mixed with adrenaline in a cocktail of tension that made every breath feel heavy. She realized with chilling clarity that this moment was the crucible she had trained for but never expected to face. And then a voice, not through the intercom but faintly, crackling through static on her personal radio. "Flight 482, this is Razor 1. Olivia froze. Her heart skipped a beat. Razor 1. A call sign she had once carried in the military, in missions classified beyond anything she had ever spoken of. The pilots, trained elite whose trust she had earned and earned alone, now communicated through static, directing her. Her mind raced. Why now? Why here? She had hidden her past, living a civilian life, concealing the skills and call signs that had made her both feared and respected in the military. And yet, in the worst possible moment, her old life had found her. The cabin crew noticed her stiffening posture but couldn't comprehend the meaning behind her eyes. "Razor 1, she whispered, gripping the radio, barely daring to believe. She felt the wings shudder again, the plane responding to the storm like a living entity resisting control. Outside, clouds twisted violently and lightning struck impossibly close, illuminating the wingtip in a blinding flash. The altitude warning beeped, sharp and urgent. Olivia's training kicked in. She directed the crew, "Check all instruments, secure passengers, stay calm, and prepare for a possible manual override." Her voice rang with authority born of experience no one else aboard could claim. The passengers looked to her, some clutching hands, others silently sobbing. The turbulence made every movement dangerous. A sudden tilt could send anyone flying. Her mind raced through emergency protocols, weighing each possibility. If the pilots were incapacitated, she could attempt the emergency override procedure. But that meant entering a cockpit without confirmation of their condition, without knowing whether the controls were functional. She swallowed hard. The weight of 174 lives pressed against her chest, each one a silent question. Can you save us? A violent jolt threw her to her knees. Coffee cups shattered. A mother screamed. A young man's phone slid under a seat. Olivia grabbed the nearest strap, steadying herself, eyes scanning for hazards, moving like a conductor orchestrating the chaos. And then a metallic groan echoed from the engines, a warning that something deeper, mechanical, and terrifyingly unpredictable had begun. Olivia steadied herself, knelt next to the child in 8A, whispered again, "Stay with me, stay with me." Her voice was the only thread of calm in a sea of fear. The storm outside pounded the fuselage like fists against steel. The unknown loomed larger than ever, threatening to shatter every instinct, every skill she had ever learned. And then, without warning, the radio crackled again, clearer this time. "Olivia, follow our guidance. We're on our way." Her blood ran cold and hot at the same time. Recognition, disbelief, and hope collided. F-35 jets, elite fighter pilots she had once trained alongside, were now tracking her, responding to a call sign she had buried in secrecy. The realization struck her like lightning. Flight 482 wasn't just in danger. It was about to become a battlefield of survival, skill, and instinct where only one person could lead the way. Olivia's fingers brushed against the cockpit door once more, a deep inhale steadying her racing heart. The plane shuddered violently, but this time her resolve solidified. She would enter that cockpit. She would take control. She would save every single life aboard, no matter the cost. The storm raged outside, but inside Flight 482, a quiet, determined fire ignited. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was a warrior called Razor One, standing on the edge of the impossible, ready to confront a fate that would test every ounce of courage and skill she possessed. Olivia's hand rested on the cockpit door, cold metal beneath her fingertips. The storm outside howled, buffeting Flight 482 as lightning illuminated the fuselage like jagged strobe lights. Her heart raced, each beat echoing in her ears like the drum of an impending disaster. She drew a deep breath, recalling every emergency procedure she had drilled for years, every simulation she had survived in training, and even the covert military exercises she'd never told anyone about. She was ready, or as ready as a civilian could be, standing on the edge of an impossible crisis. The cockpit door had been locked tight, but she remembered the override procedure, a rarely used top-secret measure, only executed in the dire circumstances. Her fingers fumbled for the small emergency key tucked beneath the flight manual. The metal clicked, the lock resisting, but eventually yielded. Olivia's pulse spiked as she twisted the handle and slowly pushed the door open. The cockpit was a blur of blinking lights, digital panels, and unresponsive controls. And then she saw it. Both pilots slumped over their consoles, unconscious, faces pale, breathing shallow. Olivia froze for a heartbeat, swallowing the lump in her throat. Years of military flight training surged forward in her mind. She knelt next to the first pilot, checking for a pulse. Alive. Consciousness was only momentarily lost, but in this storm, every second counted. The co-pilot stirred faintly, but confusion replaced coordination. Olivia realized that this would not be a standard landing. This would be entirely up to her. She had spent years pretending she had left this life behind, burying the call sign, Razor One, beneath civilian routines, but the moment had found her. Stepping into the co-pilot seat, Olivia's hands hovered over the controls. She felt a familiar hum in her fingertips, a memory of 1,000 simulator drills, night missions, and high-altitude sorties. The plane trembled violently again, throwing a coffee cup across the cockpit floor. Lightning illuminated the panels, revealing fuel warnings and turbulent air alerts. Olivia gritted her teeth, recalling the mantra she had drilled into herself years ago: focus, assess, act. She flicked switches, adjusted throttles, and read the warnings aloud, translating the blinking red lights into actionable steps. Then the radio crackled and Razor One's voice came through again. Olivia, maintain course heading 274. Adjust throttle 15%. Prepare for controlled descent. We've got you. Her eyes widened. The call sign she had abandoned years ago, the legendary identity she had hidden, was guiding her now. And the pilots, the F-35 squadron, were not just communicating. They were orchestrating her every move. Her pulse doubled, adrenaline surging as the gravity of the situation hit. Flight 482 was alive under her hands, trembling like a wounded beast, and the storm outside seemed determined to claim it. Olivia steadied the yoke, her knuckles white. The plane dipped sharply, the altimeter plunging. Outside, the Appalachian peaks loomed like jagged teeth, dangerous and unforgiving. Lightning illuminated them in stark, sudden flashes. "Steady, steady," she muttered, recalling the intricate maneuvers from top-secret training, her mind moving faster than her hands. She adjusted the rudder, tilted the wings carefully, and whispered instructions into the radio, coordinating with Razor One. Inside the cabin, the turbulence was relentless. Flight attendants held passengers down, reassuring but visibly tense. Olivia's voice carried through the intercom, steady and calm. "Remain in your seats. Keep belts fastened. We're handling it." Children whimpered, a man muttered prayers, and a mother clutched her child so tightly it seemed she might fuse to them both. Olivia's gaze flicked to 8A, the little girl sleeping through the chaos, clutching her plush bear. Olivia felt a pang of protective fury. She would not fail, not today. The plane shuddered again, violently this time as the engines groaned under the strain. Olivia's mind raced. She had trained for engine failure, for depressurization, for every conceivable mechanical catastrophe, but never for this combination: turbulence, unconscious pilots, and a storm designed to crush steel. Her fingers flew over the yoke and throttles, responding to each shudder, each tilt, each warning. She moved with a grace born of instinct, not fear, as the plane groaned beneath her command. And then she saw them. 2 F-35s streaking through the clouds, their navigation lights blinking in formation. They were closer now, almost within visual range, slicing through the storm like guardian angels of steel. Razor One's voice came again. "Olivia, align with the visual markers. We'll guide you through. Trust your instincts." Olivia's jaw tightened. She had no choice but to follow. Her hands danced over switches she had only ever memorized in simulations, her eyes flicking between instruments, altimeter, and horizon. Every shift of the yoke, every twist of the throttle had to be precise, calibrated to the millisecond. Behind her, passengers clutched their seats, oblivious to the near-impossible dance unfolding in the cockpit. Suddenly, a jolt threw the plane to the left, sending a beverage cart crashing into the galley. Olivia's stomach dropped. She steadied the plane and spoke into the radio. "I've got a severe wing tilt. Guidance." Razor One's voice cut through. "Adjust 7 degrees starboard. Throttle 20%. Descend at 500 feet per minute. Keep her steady." Olivia's fingers followed the instructions, her mind moving faster than her heartbeat. The plane responded, swaying but holding, her instincts merging with Razor One's guidance. She could see the mountains approaching faster now, peaks illuminated by lightning, the storm's fury unrelenting. She swallowed hard and muttered, "Almost there, almost there." In the cabin, a tense hush had fallen. The collective breath of 174 souls seemed to hang in the air, suspended between terror and hope. Olivia's eyes flicked to the co-pilot, who was beginning to regain awareness, blinking rapidly, confusion evident. I can't," he began. Olivia placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You're safe. I've got this. Follow my lead." Another violent shudder shook the plane. Olivia gritted her teeth. Lightning flashed so close it reflected in the cockpit panels, illuminating the path ahead. She adjusted the yoke, navigating between peaks, descending carefully under Razor One's unseen guidance. Every move required perfect coordination, One misstep could send them plummeting into the jagged terrain below. Her muscles burned, adrenaline coursing through every fiber of her body. She whispered to herself, "Focus, Olivia. You were born for this moment." And then through the chaos, she noticed something extraordinary. The F-35s, her silent guardians, were signaling with flashes of their lights. She recognized the code instantly, an acknowledgement, respect, trust. The pilots weren't just guiding her, they were saluting her skill, her courage, her past. A rush of disbelief and pride surged through her. Even in this life-or-death scenario, the recognition of her hidden identity lent her strength. Olivia's grip tightened, and she maneuvered the plane through a sudden clearing in the clouds, navigating by instinct, instrument, and the unseen eyes of Razor One. Every passenger, crew member, and soul aboard depended on her. The storm had not relented. Turbulence continued to batter the fuselage, engines groaned, alarms blared. Yet, for the first time since takeoff, Olivia felt a strange calm settle in her chest. She was in her element. This was what she had trained for, what she had been preparing for her entire life, hidden behind civilian smiles and flight routines. She whispered one last mantra before the descent into the unknown. "I've got this. We're going to survive." Split the sky, illuminating Flight 482 like a metal leviathan suspended between heaven and earth. Olivia's knuckles whitened on the yoke as the plane shuddered violently, each tilt a threat against the fragile equilibrium keeping them airborne. Outside, the storm churned with ferocity, clouds twisting into monstrous shapes that seemed almost alive. The mountainous terrain below loomed like jagged teeth, threatening to consume everything in its path. And yet, through the chaos, a signal appeared, a pair of streaks of light slicing through the storm. Olivia froze. Two F-35s cut through the clouds, their engines screaming, lights flashing in precise cadence. She recognized the formation instinctively. These were not ordinary jets. These were elite pilots, ones she had trained alongside in a life she had tried to leave behind, responding not to protocol but to a name they knew intimately, Razor One. Her past, long buried under civilian anonymity, had found her in the worst possible hour. The radio crackled to life, slicing through the cabin's tense hum. Flight 482, Olivia, maintain heading 274. Throttle at 18%. Prepare for guided descent. We've got you. Her heart skipped a beat. That voice, commanding, unmistakable, authoritative, was one she had heard countless times in missions classified beyond anything civilians could imagine. The call sign was hers, a shadowed identity she had kept hidden, now echoing across 30,000 feet of turbulent sky. "Razor One," she whispered, disbelief mingling with a surge of adrenaline. The realization hit her in full force. These jets were responding to her, not to the airline, not to air traffic control, but to her. The cockpit instruments glowed in the flashes of lightning, each warning a dagger of red light. Olivia's hands moved instinctively over the controls, adjusting throttles, stabilizing the plane, aligning with the F-35s. The turbulence roared against the fuselage, tossing the aircraft like a toy. She adjusted the yoke, recalling every training exercise, every emergency scenario she had ever practiced in simulators and in the field. Her mind moved faster than her fingers, her instincts a perfect marriage of civilian flight skill and military precision. Behind her, the co-pilot slowly regained awareness, blinking in confusion at the instruments and lights. Olivia's hand steadied him, voice firm. "You're safe. Follow my lead." He swallowed hard, nodding, and allowed her to guide the plane. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of the call sign, not as a symbol of authority, but as a mantle of responsibility that carried lives with it. Through the radio, Razor One's voice continued, calm but precise. Altitude decreasing faster than recommended. Adjust rudder 5 degrees starboard. Engines at 85%. Descend 400 feet per minute. Steady. Maintain visual on our lead. Olivia followed the instructions, her hands a blur over the controls. The mountains approached faster, peaks jagged against the stormy canvas, each lightning strike illuminating their danger. She glanced briefly at the cabin, where the passengers were oblivious to the extraordinary orchestration of life and death taking place above them. Mothers clutched children, teens squeezed hands, and an elderly man whispered a prayer, unaware that their salvation depended on the precision and instincts of a woman they didn't even know. The first F-35 veered slightly, flashing its lights in sequence. Olivia recognized the code immediately, a visual confirmation she was aligned correctly. Her pulse quickened. They weren't just guiding her, they were communicating respect, trust, and acknowledgement. In the military, such signals were reserved for elite pilots, heroes, and legends. Now, airborne above a storm-tossed landscape, the jets saluted her. Her call sign was alive, commanding the airspace even in her civilian disguise. She focused, adjusting throttle and yoke, stabilizing the plane as it pitched violently, engines groaning under strain. The second F-35 mirrored her movements, a precise shadow guiding her through the violent turbulence. Olivia whispered instructions to herself. Altitude, pitch, throttle, steady, steady. Her words became a rhythm, a mantra of survival as the storm threatened to rip the plane apart. Suddenly, a violent gust lifted the nose of Flight 482, throwing the plane into a near-vertical tilt. Panic erupted behind her. A woman screamed. A tray table clattered and luggage slid across the cabin floor. Olivia's hands flew over the controls, countering the tilt, following Razor One's guidance to the letter. The plane responded, groaning but obeying, dancing on the knife's edge between disaster and salvation. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the cockpit in stark clarity. She glimpsed the F-35 pilots through the window, helmets reflecting storm flashes, a silent salute in their posture. Recognition passed in an instant. In that moment, Olivia understood the magnitude of her situation. This was more than survival. This was a reckoning. Her hidden past, the life of missions, call signs, and covert flights she had buried, was now the only thing keeping 174 souls alive. Flight 482, Razor 1, align with our lead for descent sequence, the radio crackled. Olivia followed the instructions meticulously, tilting, banking, adjusting throttle with precision. Every movement was amplified by the storm, every second a choice between life and catastrophe. The mountains rushed closer, peaks jagged like knives beneath the storm clouds. The co-pilot glanced at her, eyes wide, voice shaking. I've never seen anyone do this." Olivia didn't respond. There was no time. Her entire being focused on the instruments, the storm, and the signals flashing from above. She was in the zone where skill, instinct, and courage merged into pure survival. Every maneuver felt like a heartbeat, each adjustment a thread holding 174 lives in delicate balance. Then came a sudden jolt. One of the engines sputtered, smoke curling from the nacelle. The fuselage groaned as the plane shuddered violently. Olivia's stomach dropped. She remembered emergency protocols. If the engine failed, she would have to compensate with immediate adjustments to throttle, rudder, and pitch. There was no margin for error. She muttered under her breath, "Not today, not on my watch." Her hands moved with practiced precision, throttle adjustments, rudder tilts, and wing compensation executed seamlessly. The engine's sputter slowed, stabilized. Lightning illuminated the scene again, F-35s flanking, sending confirmation signals. Olivia's pulse surged with relief, though there was no time to relax. The descent sequence still awaited, the mountain still loomed, the storm still raged. She glanced at the sleeping girl in 8A. Somehow, amid chaos, the child remained serene, clutching her plush bear. Olivia's chest tightened. "This is why I'm here," she thought. Every skill, every secret mission, every hidden call sign, it all led to this moment. She would not fail, not for herself, not for the people depending on her. "Steady, steady, follow the lead," she whispered, fingers dancing over controls. The F-35s responded with precise maneuvers, flashing lights, guiding her through the storm. In that moment, Olivia realized the truth. The call sign Razor One was not just a name. It was a responsibility, a legacy, a promise that she would rise when needed most, no matter the cost. The plane shuddered again, but this time Olivia's confidence anchored it. She followed the jets, lights reflecting in the rain-soaked cockpit windows. Every movement, every tilt, every adjustment was calculated, deliberate, and daring. The passengers, unaware of the epic ballet unfolding above the clouds, clutched seats and prayed. The storm roared, but Olivia's hands were steady, guided by instinct, training, and the invisible guardians of the sky. And then through the chaos, a moment of clarity. The mountains gave way to a break in the clouds, a faint view of a runway illuminated like a beacon of hope. The F-35's flashed lights in confirmation. Olivia exhaled, heart pounding, adrenaline surging, hands steady. The first step towards survival had been taken. Yet as she glanced at the instruments, she knew the descent sequence had only begun. The storm was not done. The engine strained. Every maneuver still carried the weight of 174 lives. But one thing was clear. Razor One had returned to the sky, and nothing, not storm, not terrain, not fear, would stop her. The break in the clouds offered a fleeting glimpse of the runway below, its lights glimmering through the storm like tiny beacons of hope. Olivia's chest tightened. It was the first clear sign that survival was possible, but the storm still raged, battering the fuselage and engines, reminding her that the descent would be perilous. Each heartbeat was measured against the screaming roar of the engines, the violent tilt of the wings, and the unpredictable turbulence that threatened to throw Flight 482 into the jagged peaks below. She adjusted the throttle, her fingers precise despite the trembling in her hands. Every second mattered. The co-pilot, now semi-conscious, followed her instructions with wide-eyed trust. "Altimeter," Olivia demanded. "We're descending too fast." 4,000 and dropping, he replied, voice tight with fear. "Steady the yoke, 5 degrees starboard, follow Razor One's guidance." Outside, the F-35 sliced through the storm, their lights flashing a meticulous rhythm. Olivia recognized each signal instantly. They weren't just guiding her, they were coordinating with her instincts, calibrating her movements with the precision only elite pilots could execute. The turbulence intensified. The plane shuddered violently, throwing passengers against their restraints. A man screamed, a woman gasped, a child whimpered, but Olivia's voice cut through the cabin. "Everyone, remain calm. Brace positions, we've got this." Lightning illuminated the cabin intermittently, casting ghostly shadows across terrified faces. Olivia's eyes flicked to 8A, where the little girl clutched her plush bear with an uncanny calm. That calm was fragile, suspended on Olivia's ability to guide the plane through chaos. She swallowed hard and focused, every movement a blend of training, instinct, and sheer willpower. The altimeter dipped alarmingly. The storm's fury was unrelenting, tearing at the fuselage, forcing her to make split-second calculations. She followed Razor One's instructions, banking, adjusting throttle, compensating for wind shear. The first F-35 signaled, guiding her around a sudden ridge that appeared through the cloud cover, its lights flashing an almost imperceptible pattern of reassurance. Olivia whispered to herself, "Steady, steady, focus." Another violent shudder rocked the plane. Coffee cups flew from trays, an overhead bin popped open, and luggage spilled into the aisle. Olivia's hands moved instinctively, stabilizing the plane, tilting wings, correcting yaw. The storm was relentless, the winds merciless, yet she navigated with a precision born of decades of hidden skill. She was no longer a flight attendant, she was Razor One incarnate, a legend resurrected in the most unlikely place. "Throttle at 80%, rudder starboard 5, maintain descent rate," Razor One's voice crackled over the radio. Olivia executed the instructions flawlessly, feeling the aircraft respond beneath her hands. The mountains loomed closer, jagged peaks slicing through the clouds, illuminated by lightning. One misstep now would be catastrophic. Inside, panic and trust battled in equal measure. Flight attendants clutched railings, securing passengers, giving calm instructions. Mothers whispered prayers, fathers held children, teens squeezed hands. Each life was a fragile thread in Olivia's hands, and she knew the tiniest error could unravel them all. The F-35s flashed again, a confirmation sequence signaling that the runway alignment was correct. Olivia adjusted pitch and throttle, carefully maneuvering between the peaks and the storm. The plane trembled violently as wind shear caught the left wing. She countered immediately, yoke twisting in expert hands, stabilizing the plane just as it threatened to tilt dangerously. Then came the engine sputter, a deep, menacing rumble from the left engine. Smoke curled from the nacelle and red lights blinked across the cockpit panel. Panic threatened to rise, but Olivia shoved it down. This was her crucible, and there was no room for hesitation. She adjusted the right throttle to compensate, recalibrated rudder and pitch, and followed Razor One's guidance with unerring precision. The plane groaned but responded, holding its trajectory. The runway lights drew closer, still faint and shimmering through the storm, a fragile thread of salvation. Olivia's heart pounded as the altimeter continued its downward descent. The F-35s flanked the aircraft, their lights flashing confirmation and guidance. One more miscalculation, one false move, and Flight 482 would be torn apart by the unforgiving terrain. "Hold steady, prepare for final approach," Olivia shouted, voice ringing with authority. She moved with absolute focus, guiding the plane through turbulence that would have terrified even the most seasoned pilot. She recalled every covert mission, every emergency drill, every split-second decision from her past life. Her hands moved almost automatically, yoke and throttle dancing in perfect synchrony with Razor One's invisible instructions. A sudden gust tilted the plane sharply. Olivia countered instinctively, fighting against the storm, every muscle in her body straining with effort. Behind her, the co-pilot whispered, awestruck, I've never seen anyone handle this." She didn't respond. Words would break the rhythm. Focus was survival. The mountains receded slightly as the plane aligned with the runway. Lightning illuminated the final stretch. Olivia's jaw tightened. Every instrument screamed caution, every shudder reminded her of the razor's edge she walked. Then a flash from the F-35's confirmation. She adjusted throttle, tilted wings, corrected yaw. Flight 482 responded, stabilizing in the brief lull the storm offered. Her breath was ragged, but her focus unbroken. The runway lights were almost within reach. She whispered to herself, "Almost there. Stay with me, we can do this." The cabin had grown eerily silent, passengers frozen in tense anticipation. Olivia glanced briefly at 8A. The little girl stirred but didn't panic. Flight attendants held their positions, every eye on the cockpit. She could feel the collective heartbeat of 174 souls suspended in the storm, and she vowed not to let them down. Another violent tilt. Thunder shook the fuselage. Olivia's hands fought against the controls, every adjustment a battle with the storm itself. Razor One's voice came again. Altitude steady, runway alignment confirmed. Descent 300 feet per minute steady. Her pulse synchronized with the instruments. The plane's nose dipped, engines screamed, turbulence raged, yet she held it together. Every nerve in her body burned with focus. She knew she had seconds, maybe less, to get this right. Then through the chaos, a glimpse of calm, a narrow corridor between clouds and mountains, illuminated by the runway. Olivia adjusted throttle, steadying the descent, tilting the wings with perfect precision. She whispered under her breath, "We're almost home, hold on." The plane shuddered violently once more, turbulence attempting to wrest control from her hands, but Olivia fought it with every ounce of strength and skill. The runway lights grew brighter, closer. She aligned, yoke steady, throttle precise, every decision a heartbeat away from disaster. And in that moment, a realization hit her. This was not just survival. This was the culmination of a life she had hidden, a legacy she had buried beneath anonymity. Razor One had returned not for glory, not for recognition, but to save lives. And now, 174 souls depended on her skill, courage, and determination. Olivia inhaled deeply, hands unwavering on the controls, eyes locked on the runway, heart beating in sync with the storm's rhythm. The descent sequence was almost complete, But the final challenge remained, the landing itself. Every second, every tilt, every gust of wind could determine life or death. The storm had not yet released its grip, and Flight 482 was still vulnerable. The runway lights grew steadily brighter, a fragile ribbon cutting through the storm. Olivia's hands tightened on the yoke, her knuckles white, muscles taut with focus. The roar of the engines mixed with the violent howls of wind and thunder, forming a symphony of chaos that would have paralyzed any ordinary pilot. But Olivia was far from ordinary. Every flick, tilt, and adjustment was precise, her fingers moving instinctively over the controls, guided by Razor One's unwavering voice and decades of hidden expertise. The plane lurched violently, pitching left as a rogue gust struck the fuselage. Flight attendants gripped straps and railings, eyes wide with fear. Passengers held their breaths, clutching each other as if sheer will could protect them. Olivia whispered under her breath, "Not today, not on my watch." She twisted the yoke to compensate, throttling carefully, correcting the wing tilt as alarms blared around her. "Throttle steady. Align runway. Maintain descent," Razor One instructed, voice calm and precise through the radio. Olivia's fingers moved in perfect synchronization, adjusting the plane's speed, tilt, and pitch. She could see the runway lights slicing through the storm now, a narrow corridor between lightning illuminated clouds. Every movement had to be perfect. One miscalculation and Flight 482 would meet the mountains before touching Earth. The co-pilot, now fully alert, stared at her with awe. I've never seen anything like this." Olivia didn't respond. Words would break the rhythm. Focus was survival. She adjusted the throttle again, checking instruments, correcting the rudder. The left engine shuddered, coughing smoke from the nacelle, but Olivia compensated instantly, balancing power through the right engine. The aircraft steadied, but the storm was relentless. Rain lashed the cockpit windows, wind sheared through violent gusts, and lightning illuminated the chaos with every split second. "Hold steady, 5 degrees starboard, adjust throttle to 85%. Razor One's voice guided her with absolute precision. Olivia executed the commands, feeling Flight 482 respond beneath her hands like a wild stallion finally trusting its rider. The turbulence pushed, rocked, and threatened to throw them off course, but Olivia countered every force with exacting skill, every adjustment calculated, every tilt intentional. Inside the cabin, passengers were frozen in tense anticipation. Mothers clutched children, fathers whispered prayers, teens squeezed hands with white knuckles. Flight attendants moved with cautious determination, reassuring and directing. The plane pitched violently again. Olivia's hands fought against the yoke, countering the tilt, aligning the aircraft with the runway. The landing sequence had begun, but it was far from simple. The mountains loomed dangerously close as the final descent accelerated. Olivia's pulse raced, mind sharpened. Every instrument blinked warnings, each alarm a dagger, yet she moved with the confidence of someone who had faced the impossible countless times before. Razor One's voice guided her through a final series of adjustments. Nose down 5 degrees, throttle 90%, align with lights, steady, steady. Olivia obeyed, heart pounding as the plane lurched violently once more. The co-pilot clutched the edge of his seat, eyes wide with terror and admiration. Olivia's gaze flicked toward Ada. The little girl remained calm, clutching her bear. That serene trust ignited a fierce resolve in Olivia. She would land this plane. Every life on board depended on her. She would not fail. Lightning illuminated the cockpit, revealing the runway through the storm like a narrow vein of light. Olivia adjusted pitch and rudder, throttling carefully, wings tilting just enough to compensate for violent gusts. The plane descended rapidly, engines roaring, instruments screaming, yet she guided Flight 482 with the precision of a master artisan. The F-35s flanked the aircraft, lights flashing in perfect coordination, a silent acknowledgement of skill and trust. The rain pounded against the fuselage, the wind shearing violently, and the runway lights seemed to shift as if teasing her with an impossible target. Olivia whispered commands to herself, Aligned steady, throttle nose down steady, the co-pilot followed her instructions, allowing her to take full control. The aircraft tilted violently, but she countered, steadying the descent. Each adjustment was life-saving, calculated, and breathtakingly precise. The F-35 signaled the final approach. Olivia's fingers danced over the yoke and throttle, coordinating speed, pitch, and tilt. The mountains below loomed dangerously, but the runway remained the sole thread between survival and catastrophe. She felt the strain in every muscle, adrenaline coursing through her veins, yet her mind was razor-sharp, every thought and instinct aligned with the singular goal: land Flight 482 safely. Then, just as the plane aligned perfectly, another violent gust hit, tilting the nose to the left. The fuselage screamed in protest, alarms blared, and the cabin shook violently. Olivia's heart leapt, but she responded instantly, twisting the yoke, adjusting throttle, compensating with expert precision. Flight 482 groaned, shuddered, but remained obedient. The runway grew closer, yet the storm's wrath was unrelenting. "Steady, steady, hold her," Olivia shouted into the cockpit, voice filled with authority and raw determination. The co-pilot mirrored her actions, following every command. Outside, the F-35s flanked the aircraft, their lights flashing in perfect rhythm, guiding her final approach. Olivia's pulse synced with the plane's vibrations, each second stretched into eternity. The first wheels touched the runway with a shudder, skidding slightly on the wet tarmac. Olivia held the yoke firmly, countering the plane's sway as rain hammered the fuselage. The runway lights streaked beneath them, and Flight 482 roared against the friction, tires screeching, engines straining to stabilize. She could hear the screams of passengers, not of fear, but of disbelief and relief blending into a symphony of life. The second set of wheels kissed the runway. Olivia applied reverse thrust, fighting the slick surface, tilting wings to compensate for crosswinds. The F-35s mirrored her movements, maintaining a perfect formation, flashing signals of acknowledgement and respect. Flight 482 began to slow, the violent turbulence still shaking the aircraft, but her control remained unbroken. "Thrust reverse, rudder aligned, steady her," Razor One's final guidance echoed through the radio. Olivia executed flawlessly, feeling the plane respond beneath her like a living creature finally at peace. The storm howled, yet Flight 482 persisted, defying every obstacle, every gust, every danger that sought to claim it. Finally, with a violent groan and screech of tires, Flight 482 came to a stop. The plane trembled, engines screaming in exhaustion, yet it held. Olivia exhaled deeply, her body trembling from strain and adrenaline, her hands still gripping the yoke. 174 souls had survived, each heart aboard now pounding with relief, gratitude, and awe. The storm still raged around them, but for the first time there was safety, however fragile. Passengers erupted in applause, tears, and sobs, the collective tension dissolving in a wave of relief. Flight attendants hugged and reassured, shaking with exhaustion and joy. Olivia glanced around, eyes locking briefly with the little girl in 8A, who gave a small, sleepy smile. Her plush bear remained clutched tightly, a silent testament to trust and survival. And then through the storm, the F-35s flashed their lights one final time. A silent salute, an acknowledgement of skill, courage, and the legendary call sign Olivia had carried. Razor One had returned, not for recognition, not for fame, but for the lives entrusted to her hands, and she had succeeded beyond every possible measure. Olivia allowed herself a single, trembling smile. She had saved 174 lives at 30,000 feet, guided by instinct, experience, and a call sign that had never truly left her. And though the storm still raged, Flight 482 was safe, grounded on the runway, a testament to human skill, courage, and resolve. The storm still raged overhead, rain lashing against the tarmac, engines of Flight 482 screaming their exhaustion, yet the aircraft remained grounded, victorious against the chaos of nature. Olivia exhaled slowly, releasing a tension she hadn't realized she had been holding for hours. Her hands finally loosened from the yoke, trembling, sticky with sweat. Around her, passengers clung to each other, faces wet with tears, some silent, some sobbing openly. The collective heartbeat of 174 lives, once suspended in terror, now thumped in a shared rhythm of relief and disbelief. Flight attendants moved cautiously, checking each passenger, offering water, blankets, and words of reassurance. Mothers hugged children tightly, whispering gratitude while fathers clasped hands over hearts, mouths moving silently in prayerful thanks. Teenagers hugged each other, wide-eyed and shaking, the magnitude of survival settling in. Olivia's gaze scanned the cabin, stopping at 8A, where the little girl clutched her plush bear tightly, still serene despite everything. A small, tired smile met Olivia's eyes, and she felt the sharp pang of a quiet victory. She had kept everyone safe. Her thoughts returned to the F-35s, still hovering near the edge of the storm, engines whining against the gale. Olivia stepped onto the tarmac briefly, rain pelting her face, and raised a hand instinctively in acknowledgement. The lead jet tilted slightly, flashing lights in an unmistakable pattern of recognition. A salute. Her stomach twisted. The pilots recognized her, not as the civilian flight attendant, but as Razor One, the call sign that had once haunted classified missions, whispered among the elite, feared and respected beyond measure. Memories surged unbidden. Night flights over hostile territories, missions that demanded perfection and silence, decisions that had meant life or death, consequences buried in secrecy. Olivia had traded that life for one of quiet anonymity, civilian smiles, and routine airline flights. She had hoped the world would forget Razor One. Yet in the face of catastrophe, the call sign had resurfaced, commanding respect, guiding her hands, and ensuring survival. A voice crackled in her headset, familiar and steady. Razor One, incredible work. Flight 482 is secure thanks to you. The world doesn't know it yet, but history will. Olivia's throat tightened. She had expected anonymity, maybe gratitude from her crew, but not this. Recognition from the pilots she had once trusted, once flown alongside in deadly missions, was both humbling and overwhelming. The storm had not only tested her skill but unveiled her identity in a way she could no longer hide. Air traffic control's voice followed, clipped but astonished. Flight 482, you are cleared. Emergency landing protocol executed perfectly. We will notify emergency services and medical teams. Olivia exhaled, finally letting herself slump in the co-pilot seat. Her fingers still twitched on the yoke, the muscle memory of precision gripping her even now. The co-pilot glanced at her, awe and curiosity mixing in his gaze. I've flown with some of the best, but I've never seen anyone do that. How did you? She shook her head, still processing. Years of training, focus, and experience you wouldn't believe. Her voice softened almost imperceptibly. She glanced at the passengers, their faces reflecting relief and gratitude, and realized the scale of what had just occurred. She hadn't just flown a plane. She had orchestrated survival, a ballet of precision, courage, and instinct against forces that seemed almost supernatural in their ferocity. Outside, the F-35s banked in formation, engines whining in farewell. One pilot, helmet reflecting the storm flashes, signaled once more, slow, deliberate lights forming a pattern, respect, acknowledgement, and an unspoken promise. Razor One was known among the elite, feared, admired, and trusted. And now, on this rain-soaked tarmac, Olivia felt that legacy settle over her shoulders again. Not as a memory, not as a secret, but as undeniable truth. The media would come, rumors would spread. Flight 482's passengers would recount the storm, the impossible landing, and the calm figure who had guided them through. But Olivia wasn't ready for fame, not yet. She glanced at the co-pilot, the flight attendants, the passengers. "You're all safe," she murmured. "That's all that matters." Yet even as she spoke, she felt a stir of emotion she hadn't anticipated. Pride. Pride that she had returned to the sky under impossible circumstances. Pride that Razor One, long hidden, had saved 174 lives today. and pride that she had done what few could ever imagine possible. Paramedics and emergency crews began approaching the plane, but Olivia stayed in the cockpit, letting the adrenaline ebb slowly. Her headset buzzed again, Razor One's voice cutting through the storm one last time. "You've exceeded every expectation. The pilots, the crews, the world, they'll remember this, and they'll know the name behind the call sign." Olivia's chest tightened. She had hidden, retreated, and lived quietly among civilians for years. Yet today, the call sign had found her again, revealing not only her skill but the weight of the legacy she carried. She glanced around the cabin one last time, eyes meeting those of the passengers, seeing fear transformed into awe, panic into gratitude. Each of them alive, each of them saved by the hands of someone the world had never seen, not fully. And then the first reporter arrived, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Miss Flight Attendant, what happened? How did you manage to land during that storm?" Olivia's pulse quickened. She knew the story was about to spread beyond the tarmac, beyond Flight 482, beyond the storm. She had two choices: remain anonymous or reveal the truth. And for the first time, she realized that Razor One could no longer hide. The pilots had acknowledged her publicly with their silent salute. The passengers had witnessed her courage. The world now was about to see what she had always been capable of. She straightened, wet hair plastered to her face, voice firm but calm. "I did my job, and the pilots guiding me, they ensured all 174 lives on board were safe. That's all that matters." Her gaze drifted to the sky, where the F-35s were disappearing into the storm clouds, their presence a lingering testament to trust and skill. A reporter pressed further, sensing the story behind the story. "But you're calm, your skilled people are calling this a miracle. Who are you really?" Olivia hesitated, knowing the weight of what she was about to reveal. She could remain a mystery, or she could honor the legacy that had saved so many. She took a deep breath, voice steady. "Some call me Razor One. It's not a title I chose lightly, but today it guided me and saved lives." Gasps rippled through the small crowd. The word Razor One carried weight, history, and fear, even among civilians. The F-35 pilots had recognized it. Now the world would know it. The legend had returned not for glory but for truth. Passengers and crew began murmuring, some whispering the name with awe. The co-pilot shook his head, incredulous. "Razor One, I've read the reports, but I never thought I'd see it in person. Incredible." Olivia allowed herself a small, weary smile. "It's not about me," she said softly. "It's about everyone on board. Today they're alive, that's what matters." Yet in her chest, she felt a fire ignite, a mixture of pride, relief, and the unmistakable pull of her hidden past. The legend of Razor One had been resurrected, not in war zones or secret missions, but in the most unlikely of places. A storm-tossed civilian aircraft, 30,000 feet above ground, with 174 lives hanging in the balance. The storm began to recede, clouds breaking slightly, revealing a glimmer of sunlight on the horizon. And as Flight 482 sat grounded, battered but victorious, Olivia realized that the world had witnessed not just survival, but the return of a legend. Razor One was alive. Razor One had saved lives. And now there was no going back. The storm had finally begun to relent, clouds parting to reveal streaks of sunlight reflecting off the wet tarmac. Flight 482 sat battered but intact, a testament to the impossible skill and courage that had just saved 174 lives. Olivia stepped out of the cockpit, her uniform soaked and clinging, hair plastered to her face, and took a deep, shuddering breath. Every muscle in her body still quivered from adrenaline, but beneath it all was a profound, hard-earned calm. She had done the impossible. She had survived. She had saved lives. The passengers were already disembarking, some sobbing, some hugging tightly, some too stunned to move. Flight attendants guided them, offering blankets, water, and reassurance, though many had to stop and wipe tears from their own eyes. Mothers carried children in trembling arms, fathers whispered prayers over their families, and the teenagers and young adults clutched each other, trying to process what had just unfolded. All around her, gratitude swirled thickly in the damp air, and Olivia felt its weight settle deep in her chest. Then came the media. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward, questions shouted over the hum of engines and the distant sound of emergency vehicles. Reporters crowded the tarmac, eager for statements, eager for the story behind the story. Olivia's pulse quickened, not with fear but with awareness. The quiet life she had maintained for years, the life that had hidden the call sign Razor One from the world, was about to change forever. One reporter stepped forward, pressing a microphone toward her. "Miss, flight attendant, can you tell us how you managed to land safely during that storm?" Olivia straightened, her voice calm but authoritative, carrying the weight of truth and experience. "I did my job. Flight 482 and everyone aboard are safe. That is what matters most. The pilots guiding me ensured that we could survive, and for that I am grateful." Another reporter pressed further, sensing there was more behind the calm demeanor. "But people are calling it miraculous. Who are you really? How did you know exactly what to do?" Olivia paused. She glanced skyward where the F-35s had vanished into the thinning clouds, their lights no longer visible but their presence still palpable in the memory of guidance and respect. A smile flickered across her lips, small but unmistakable. "Some call me Razor One," she said softly, letting the name slip into the world for the first time in years. "It's not a title I chose lightly, but today it guided me and saved lives." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The name carried weight, even among civilians, an echo of whispered legends, secret missions, and elite pilots who had once feared nothing but themselves and the unknown. A few recognized it instantly. Others leaned closer, seeking confirmation. The reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every word. The public was about to learn that the woman who had saved 174 lives at 30,000 feet was no ordinary flight attendant. She was a legend. In the crowd, passengers began murmuring among themselves, astonished. "Razor One," one woman whispered to her husband, disbelief in her voice. "I've read about her. She's incredible." The co-pilot, still catching his breath, stepped closer to Olivia. I've read the reports," he said, shaking his head. "I never thought I'd see it in person. You really are Razor One." Olivia nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Today wasn't about me," she said quietly, voice filled with emotion. "It was about everyone aboard Flight 482. I only did what was necessary to keep them safe." Paramedics moved in, checking passengers and crew, but Olivia's attention was elsewhere. She scanned the horizon, the receding storm, and the runway still slick with rain. Memories of the impossible landing, the shuddering fuselage, the violent turbulence, all of it surged through her mind. Every split-second decision, every adjustment, every instinctive maneuver had been a choice between life and death. And now, all 174 lives had survived. The F-35 pilots, somewhere high above in the thinning clouds, had acknowledged her skill, her courage, and her call sign with their silent salute. Their respect, once reserved for elite comrades in classified missions, had now followed her into the public eye. Olivia had expected nothing, but this recognition reminded her that the legacy of Razor One could not remain hidden forever. It was part of who she was, and now it had a purpose beyond secrecy. The media frenzy intensified, cameras flashing, microphones jostling. A reporter shouted a question, relentless. "Miss Razor One, what will you do now? Will you continue to work in civilian aviation?" Olivia took a deep breath, steadying herself. She considered her answer carefully. "I will continue to do what I can to ensure the safety of others," she said firmly. "The world needs skilled pilots and people willing to act in emergencies, whether in civilian or military capacities. Today, we survived because teamwork, experience, and courage prevailed." Her words resonated. There was pride, humility, and authority in her tone. The reporters scribbled, the passengers whispered, and even the co-pilot nodded, understanding the truth behind her calm demeanor. Olivia had not only survived the storm, She had transformed it into a moment of clarity, a lesson in courage and skill that none would forget. Meanwhile, emergency crews worked efficiently to secure the aircraft, assist passengers, and ensure no injuries went unnoticed. Olivia watched quietly, absorbing the aftermath. The magnitude of what had occurred began to settle over her like a heavy cloak. She had performed what some would call a miracle, but in her mind, it was simply a combination of skill, training, instinct, and the guidance of those who had trusted her abilities without hesitation. A young passenger approached, hesitantly clutching a drawing she had made mid-flight. "Thank you," the child said softly, eyes wide. "You saved us all." Olivia knelt briefly, meeting the child's gaze. "You were brave too," she said gently, taking the small drawing in her hand. It depicted a plane soaring above storm clouds with a bright light cutting through darkness. "We all worked together," she added, standing again. News helicopters hovered above, capturing aerial footage of Flight 482 on the tarmac, the storm's remnants casting dramatic shadows. Reports would flood the media within hours, telling the story of survival, courage, and a legendary pilot hidden in plain sight. Olivia understood that this day would change her life forever. The world now knew Razor One existed, and that she had saved 174 lives against impossible odds. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. The storm had tested every limit of human endurance, skill, and courage. It had demanded perfection and composure under impossible circumstances, and she had delivered. Her heart still pounded, but beneath it was a quiet satisfaction. She had proven, not just to the world but to herself, that even legends can return when needed most. As she walked back toward the terminal, drenched and exhausted, the co-pilot fell into step beside her. "People are going to call you a hero," he said quietly. Olivia shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I don't need that," she said softly. "I just need to know that everyone survived. That's enough." Yet in her chest, she felt something else stirring: pride, recognition, and the undeniable pull of legacy. Razor One had been hidden, forgotten, almost erased, but now she had reclaimed her place. The legend would continue, not in secret missions, not in whispers, but in the lives she had saved, the inspiration she had left behind, and the unbreakable courage she had shown at 30,000 feet. As Flight 482 was secured and the storm clouds finally cleared, Olivia looked skyward, imagining the F-35 somewhere above, engines fatting, lights blinking in salute. She knew that even though this flight had ended, her journey was far from over. She had stepped from the shadows of anonymity and faced impossible odds, and the world had seen the truth. Razor One was real, fearless, and alive. And somewhere in the distance, the world waited, eager for the next chapter of the legend who had returned, not for glory, but for the lives she was destined to protect.